Okay, I'm here with Steve Martindale, who is the programming coordinator for the Salt Spring Film Festival. And coming up next Wednesday at Art Spring is a documentary film called Beethoven's Nine. Tell us a bit about it, Steve.
It's a film by Larry Weinstein, who's a Toronto filmmaker. It's a documentary about Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, and 2024 is the 200th anniversary of the completion of the Ninth Symphony. So Weinstein made this film to celebrate Beethoven, and he went around the world interviewing people who have been influenced by Beethoven, or who have, in some way Beethoven affects their lives. And ultimately it's a film about war and resiliency. So there's a lot of heavy stuff in the film, but it's also very uplifting because it's about people responding optimistically to some of the terrible things in the world.
Right. Now, I read that originally he didn't plan to make this film because he'd already made a film about Beethoven.
Weinstein's quite an accomplished filmmaker. He's won a bunch of awards, and he's made various films. A lot of his films have been about music, and he did have a prior documentary about Beethoven. He might be best known for a documentary called Propaganda, The Selling of Lies. As I say, he's quite accomplished. And in this film, he initially, I think he was just looking at he was looking at one aspect of the film, and then they broadened it to address, because it's the Ninth Symphony, they decided to address 9 different people who all have some connection to Beethoven. The central part of the film is about the Ukrainian Freedom Orchestra. There's a conductor named Carrie Lynn Wilson, who is a Canadian-Ukrainian, and she founded the Ukrainian Freedom Orchestra, which comprises largely refugees from the war in Ukraine. And so they perform around the world to draw attention to what's going on in Ukraine. And Carrie Lynn is interviewed in the film, and some of the other musicians. And so I believe that was the initial impetus for making the film. And then they decided to broaden it and start looking at other people as well. And as I say, he goes all over the world and interviews a whole range of people. It's a fascinating film. We've watched. Collectively, our festival has watched about 300 documentaries in the last 6 months, and this is one of the best. It's a really strong film.
The other interesting thing about this film, I think, was that during the making of it, of course, the Hamas attack in Israel happened on October the 7th.
We don't want to give too much away, but there is some unpleasantness in the film about both the war in Ukraine and the war in the Middle East, and it becomes very personal for the filmmaker. And so it kind of derails the project partway through, and it makes the film that much more profound, because some of the issues that he's addressing, which are about other people, come very close to his own family.
Yeah, it becomes a personal story for him as well as for other people.
It's a very moving film. One of the things we're trying to do with our programming at the film festival, we have 6 films coming up at Art Spring between now and the end of February, and then of course our festival itself is at the high school in the first weekend in March, February 28th to March 2nd. And one of the things we're trying to do with our programming, particularly with our Art Spring films, is have films that are serious but that are uplifting in some way. Because there's, if you just want to be depressed, we tell people you can just watch the news. Our hope is that people will come to our films looking for some kind of something a little bit uplifting, and ideally will leave the theater feeling a little more optimistic about the state of the world than when they walked in. Which is not to say the films aren't about heavy subjects, because we've got 3 of them planned and 3 more coming in the new year, and there are some heavy subjects addressed, but they won't leave people wanting to go home and end it all. Ideally, they'll leave people feeling a little more optimistic about how people are responding to some serious issues around the world with optimism and responding collectively and joyfully. That's what we're striving for in this kinds of films we're looking to present at Art Spring.
Yeah, and obviously Beethoven's Ninth Symphony is probably best known for the Ode to Joy, which is a beautiful piece of music. And let's listen to that now.
Sounds good.
Zauber binden Liebe, was die Mode strengen, alle Menschen der Begrüne, nur ein sanfter Flügel war. Deine Zauber binden
Okay, that was Ode to Joy by the Westminster Choir. And it's a very familiar piece of music. It's one that I actually sang myself when I was singing with the Vancouver Bar Choir many years ago.
Oh, so you have a personal connection. My personal connection to this film is when I was in, I think, grade 9 or 10 in high school. I portrayed Schroeder in a school play. We put on something to do with Charlie Brown and the Peanuts. And my character was Schroeder, the piano player, who's also in this film because one of the characters in the film is Charles Schulz, the cartoonist. And the reason he is focused on is because he introduced millions of kids around the world to Beethoven through his comic strip, because the character of Schroeder was a big fan of Beethoven and often argued with Lucy at the piano about Beethoven. And so Charles Schulz obviously was a fan of Beethoven, and he is now deceased, but the filmmaker interviews his widow, Jean Schulz, and she talks about how Beethoven was an influence on Charles Schulz and his comic strip.
Now, if people want to buy tickets for this event, how would they do that?
You can go to the Artspring website, which is artspring.ca. You can also go to our website, saltspringfilmfestival.com, and that will lead you to the Artspring website. And tickets are selling fast. As of this morning, there were about 32 remaining tickets. So we've sold over 180 tickets so far. So the theater is quite full, and still a few more days to pick up tickets. But I would encourage people to do so as soon as they hear this, because we expect it to sell out. Most of our screenings last year sold out, and our hope is that all 6 of our screenings this year will sell out as well.
And how much do the tickets cost?
$14 each. If you book them through the website, you'll be charged a dollar service fee through Artspring. So $14 or $15 for per ticket.
Sounds like a deal.
It's more or less the going rate for films these days, it seems. And as I say, all 6 films that we will be presenting at Artspring are going to be very strong films. They're all one night only, and I would encourage people to see as many as they can.
Can you tell us about any of the other ones?
Yeah, on December 4th, we're showing a great film called Any Other Way, the Jackie Shane story. And perhaps I'll be back here to talk to you later about Jackie Shane, because she was a trans singer who made it big in Toronto in the 60s, and she's been largely forgotten. She's one of these people who was briefly famous and has, we have that kind of societal amnesia where we tend to forget about people, especially people from marginalized communities. We have a tendency to overlook them. And so Jackie Shane was American, and as a teenager, she came to Montreal and performed in bars that were run by the mafia. And then she ended up in Toronto, and she was quite a big hit in the late 60s into the very early 70s in Toronto in the nightclub scene. And she's got a fantastic voice. She's just an incredible performer. And then she disappeared for about 40 years. And the filmmakers looked into what became of her. And what they found was that there was almost no surviving footage of her actually performing. What we have is about a 4-minute clip of her singing. And then there are still photos. And there are recordings. She did albums, and so there are live recordings and studio recordings of her performance. And then the filmmakers managed to get a hold of her on the telephone and did a series of telephone interviews with her before her death. And so they had the audio recordings. But of course, film is a cinematic, it's a visual medium. So if you don't have any visuals, it's very difficult to make a film about somebody. And they had very few. They just had some still photos and this 4-minute clip, and that was it. And then the audio recordings. So what they did is they created software to animate a character and essentially bring her back to life on the big screen. And they used artificial intelligence, and they coded the software. They spent about a year creating the software in order to produce the animation. And then they've kind of resurrected this character and brought her back to life. And it's very well done, because you forget that you're watching animation. You believe that you've really seen the actual person, even though there's almost no footage of her existing. And so that's on December 4th.
What's the next one after that?
On December the 11th, we are showing a film called Us, Our Pets, and the War. And it's an incredible film about the war in Ukraine and how people are rescuing animals in the war zone. So both domestic pets, cats and dogs, as well as zoo animals. So a lot of the zoos and shelters, of course, were abandoned at the when the war began and the Russian bombardment began. And some people then went back to try to rescue the animals. And there's these incredible scenes in this film of people putting their lives at risk to save these animals, and some of the very innovative ways they come up with with saving the animals. We've seen a number of films this year about the war in Ukraine. I've personally watched probably a dozen of them, and this one is the most uplifting. It's the one that ironically does the most to humanize the Ukrainian people, because the people in the film are so courageous and show such compassion towards the animals. You can't help but feel compassionate towards them. So it's a great film. We're presenting that with the local Friends of Ukraine Committee and the SPCA, and that's on December 11th at Art Spring.
Great. Okay, well, thanks for coming in, Steve, and I'm sure we'll be talking to you again soon.
Thank you so much, Damian.